It was barely dawn when I jolted awake to a sound like the world was indinga squirrel screaming like it had just witnessed a crime, and a jackhammer tearing into my backyard soul. I stumbled to the window, still half asleep, and saw the little critter on my sill, shrieking as if its whole family had been kicked out. And honestly, it wasn't wrong. My quiet little creek, the one that wound gently past my lilac bushes where my dog Rusty loved to splash and chase minnows, was being obliterated by two bulldozers and a trio of guys in neon vests. It wasn't even 7:30 a.m. I threw on a robe, hair looking like a bird's nest after a storm, and ran outside barefoot, yelling over the roar of machinery. "What in God's name is going on?" I demanded. One guy, barely looking up, waved a clipboard and muttered, "Homeowners Association orders, ma'am." Like that explained anything while my backyard was being turned into a war zone. Furious, I threatened to call every news station from here to San Francisco if it didn't stop. The guy just shrugged and kept digging. So I stormed inside, brewed the strongest coffee I could legally make, and dialed Eric Hawthorne, the HOA president who once fined me for HOA-ing two festive Christmas lights. His voicemail was full, naturally. By 10 a.m., the creek was gone, erased, replaced with ugly, jagged gravel and chunks of concrete that looked like they'd been scavenged from a construction site dumpster. Rusty stood at the edge of the mess, tail stiff, ears back, staring like he couldn't believe his favorite playground was now a quarry. I sank onto the porch, sipping coffee that might as well have been whiskey, wondering if this was the moment I gave up on people entirely. That creek wasn't just water, it was my anchor. When my dad passed, I sat there with Rusty and sobbed. When I finally paid off my house, I toasted with cheap wine and got a mosquito bite I still curse. Now it was just gone. At noon, Eric showed up with Susan Kessler, the HOA treasurer, who was like a hornet in a blazer. They knocked on my door, all fake smiles and practice charm. I didn't say a word, just led them to the backyard. Eric launched into a speech about environmental improvements and community benefits. I cut him off. "You call turning a natural creek into a gravel pit an improvement?" He blinked like I'd spoken in code. Susan piped up, claiming the creek bred mosquitoes and several residents had complained. I asked for names. They refused, citing privacy. Typical. I told them this was theft. They said the creek was community property under HOA control. I snapped that if they wanted my backyard, they could pay my mortgage too. Eric's smile tightened. He warned that if I kept pushing, I'd face a compliance hearing. It took everything not to chuck a rock at their perfectly styled heads. Instead, I smiled, said, "Thanks for stopping by," and watched them leave. In my language, that meant, "Get off my lawn." That night it rained. Not a sprinkly deluge, like the sky was unloading centuries of grudges. I stood at my kitchen window, feeling something stir, like nature was plotting revenge. By morning, the HOA's shiny new parking lot, built right where the creek used to drain, had collapsed. Not just cracks sunk. Cars tilted like toys in a kid's sandbox. Water pooled in oily lakes. A bike rack leaned into a whirlpool. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my toast. I grabbed a lawn chair, a thermos of tea, and binoculars, and set up across the street, watching the chaos like it was a blockbuster movie. Neighbors wandered out, clutching mugs, whispering like spooked hens. Eric and Susan arrived in matching rain ponchos, looking like discount superheroes. Eric was pale, on the verge of a breakdown. Susan was yelling into her phone. I waved cheerfully. My neighbor Tom, a retired CIVYL engineer who could probably talk a river into changing course, appeared beside me. He took one look and said, "Told you this would happen. You don't block a natural drainage system and expect the water to vanish. It fights back." He sipped his coffee like he'd just solved world hunger. I asked how bad it was. He grinned. They built a parking lot on a floodplain and plugged the drain with gravel. That's like locking a tiger in a closet and acting surprised when it claws through. I looked at him. "What's next?" He leaned in. "We fight, but smart, with science." That was the spark. I went to Tom's house that afternoon, Rusty trotting beside me like my deputy. Tom opened the door, already holding a folder of notes. His dining table was buried in maps, blueprints, and a Lego model of our neighborhood. He'd been tracking the creek's path for years, showing how it handled runoff, prevented erosion, and kept our homes safe. The HOA had bulldozed a system older than our cookie-cutter houses. They didn't just kill a creek, Tom said. They created a flood hazard for parking spaces. I asked if we could fight legally. He nodded. If we prove negligence, especially without permits, yes. I dove into public records, HOA minutes, and code enforcement files. Tom handled the technical side, while I waded through bureaucratic nonsense. We found gold. The HOA had filed a generic maintenance permit, no mention of altering a drainage system. They dodged environmental revyus by calling the creek decorative terrain. I nearly laughed myself sick. Decorative terrain? That's like calling Niagara Falls a fancy puddle. We went public. I filmed a video in my backyard, gravel pit behind me, laying out the whole mess from the creek's destruction to the parking lot's collapse. Tom did a cameo, using a sponge and a pitcher to show how drainage works. Rusty sat beside me in a raincoat, looking like a soggy superhero. I uploaded it, titled, "When Your HOA Plays God and Floods Everything." By midnight, it had 20,000 VYUs. By morning, we were on the local news. The HOA was livid. Eric issued a statement about misinformation. Susan called the flood a climate fluke. I got 3 violation notices in my mailbox. One for Rusty's barking, one for my overly cheerful wind chimes, and one for my mailbox's non-uniform color. They were targeting me. I taped the notices to a big cardboard sign, wrote, "HOA retaliation is real," in marker, and staked in my yard. Rusty marked it for good measure. A VY of that went even more VY-rel. Support flooded to neighbors, strangers, even people from other towns with their own HOA horror stories. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a rebellion. The HOA called an emergency meeting, but their clubhouse was flooded, so they held it in a board member's garage. I showed up with a folder labeled EVY Denke AZ and Tom by my side. The place was packed, buzzing with anger over years of petty fines and secret deals. Eric tried to talk about bylaws, but someone shouted, "What about ignoring drainage reports?" The room turned. Tom stood, calm as ever, and explained the science with maps and a model showing how the creek once absorbed runoff. When he blocked the model's creek with gravel, water drowned a tiny parking lot. The crowd roared. Even the board member hosting the meeting clapped. Later, I found a note under my wiper from a board member wanting to talk. We met at the park. They admitted half the board opposed the creek fill, but were bullied into silence. Now, with the neighborhood riled up, there was talk of ousting Eric and Susan. My heart raced. The tide was turning. Then another storm hit. Tom warned it could flood homes, not just the lot. I barely slept, watching water pool in the street, flowing toward the gravel pit where the creek once carried it away. By dawn, the parking lot was a lake again. Worse, water backed into homes, including Susan's fancy two-story. Her sunroom was a swamp, wicker chairs floating like bad decisions. Eric's car had drifted into a bush. He stood there, hands on his head, looking like he'd lost a bet with God. Neighbors gathered, no longer laughing. This was real. Toys floated down the street. A basement flooded. It wasn't just about principle, it was personal. We hired an environmental lawyer, Lauren Pierce, with donations from our growing army. She was sharp, with eyes that could make a liar sweat. She reviewed our EVY Denke VY Deos, drone footage, permit gaps, and said, "This'll make them squirm." We filed a class action lawsuit for negligence and illegal land alteration. The HOA blamed unprecedented rain, but Lauren tore through their excuses on the news, making drainage sound like a thriller. Eric went quiet. Susan deleted her social media. A petition to remove them gained steam. At the election meeting, held in a neighbor's garage because the clubhouse still reeked of mold, the turnout was huge. Eric tried his usual charm, but someone demanded to know how much HOA money went to the failed project. Silence. The vote was brutal. Eric, Susan, and 2 others were gone. The new board included Tom, reluctantly, and 3 neighbors who'd fought with us. I passed on a sea tide, rather be the loudmouth watchdog. Rusty barked his approval. The creek came back slowly, not with a dramatic flood, but with sweat and grit. The new board got rail permits and a grant. Tom led the restoration, measuring slopes and muttering about gradients. Neighbors I barely knew hauled gravel and planted native grasses. Kids from a lemonade stand fundraiser raked dirt in tiny gloves. Rusty, in a site security vest, chased squirrels and barked at stray shovels. When water trickled back, it was soft, curling around rocks like it was stretching after a nap. Frogs returned, then birds. Rusty splashed once and bolted back, proud as ever. I stood where I'd once cried and let myself smile, maybe a little teary. The HOA changed. Meetings were open, feedback real. I wrote a newsletter column, The Watershed, poking fun at Eric's floating car and Susan's soggy furniture, but also talking about accountability and second chances. Eric moved, selling his house at a loss. Susan stayed, apologized, and planted wildflowers by the creek. I let go. A kid named Jake turned our saga into a podcast, Saw Creek and Chaos Saw, and it took off. I recorded from my kitchen, Rusty snoring in the background, sharing HOA war stories with Tom's dry humor and neighbors' tales. Listeners from everywhere sent their own nightmares, some launching their own fights. On the flood's anniversary, we held a picnic by the creek. Kids waited, adults laughed, and Rusty wore a frog-shaped life vest before rolling in mud. As the sun set, I dipped my hand in the watercool alive. This little stream had exposed greed, sparked a revolt, and stitched us together. It wasn't just a creek. It was proof that when you push nature or people too far, they push back. So what do you think? Was the HOA just clueless, or were they power-hungry bullies who got what they deserved? Should I have thrown that rock at Eric's haircut when I had the chance? And how far would you go to protect something you love, your land, your home, your community? Drop your thoughts below. Hit that like button if you're Team Creek, and subscribe for more stories of grit and revenge. Let's keep this fight flowing.